Welcome to 5 and 5 from the One Stop Co-op Shop, where I discuss 5 key elements of a game in about 5 minutes. I'm Michael Kelly, and today I'm looking at Wreckland Run, a solo-only game from Renegade. And disclaimer that they sent me a review copy of this one. I'm a big fan of post-apocalyptic themes in games, but does this one bring that Mad Max energy? Let's find out and get to the list. So my number 5 point for Wreckland Run is a mix for my taste, and that's the campaign. In the base game, you've got a 7-scenario campaign that you progress through. If you lose one scenario, you just play it again. And on the positive side, there's some cool discovery here. Each of these 7 chapters has some things you unlock, and they add new enemies to the deck that have more interesting special powers, so you kind of complicate things as you go. And also, some of the scenarios have specific rules or special decks you use that kind of change up the play. That's pretty fun. But on the negative side, while there is a narrative to go with it, it's not extremely well written, so it didn't really pull me in very much. And although you unlock stuff, you don't really level up very much, which is something I like to see in campaigns. You get a couple of skill cards, but they require you to use the same dice you're using for all your parts, so it doesn't really feel like a strict power-up and more like a lateral change, and it's giving you more options. But my number 4 is a full pro for my taste, and that's one part of the dice placement, which are the red dice. And these are used in 2 different ways. During the wreckage phase, where you're upgrading your car, you can choose to use them, but you take a chance of suffering a negative effect. You basically roll the die and see, what you get with it. So that's kind of a fun, like, sort of push your luckish little element, where you can upgrade your car more and get more things by using those red dice, but at a cost. And their other use during the run phase is to activate enemies, and I really like this too, because at first, when you're first activating enemies, you have all 3 red dice, and you have to pick one of the values to either activate the boss's special chart or to activate one of the enemies on the board. So at first, you kind of have a lot of control, but if you pick a number, you have to activate every enemy of that number. So like if I picked a 1 here, I'd activate both of these ones. So it gives you some interesting choices, and it also kind of leads you down different paths destroying enemies. Like you often want to destroy multiples of the same number, so you don't get like totally destroyed if your last die just happens to be the exact thing they need. So I really like the red dice and sort of the mitigation and choices they offer overall. But for my number 3 point, I'm back to a mix for my taste. This is the scrap mechanic. Depending on your difficulty, you'll start with a certain number of enemy cards as scrap, and anytime you defeat an enemy by bringing them to their exact life total, you also get them as scrap. And these basically become extra dice you can use to upgrade your car, or during the run phase to fire items without putting a die on them and without locking them down, because usually when you shoot with something, you have now taken away a spot to actually place a die on it, so you kind of run down your options. So on the positive side of this one, trying to get the enemies defeated by the exact number is kind of a pretty cool puzzle and gives you some interesting choices. And when you can pull off cool tactical like combos by playing a bunch of scrap cards to activate a bunch of powerful effects, that feels great. But on the negative side, and this is probably my biggest negative for the game, sometimes, and this happens a lot, especially when I play on medium difficulty, sometimes you'll just have like a ton of scrap when you go into the final boss fight. And because it lets you just keep on shooting things over and over again, I have often, like I would say in 60% of my games, just like one-shotted the boss and taken away all the tension and like the cool effects that some of the bosses have at the end. So yeah, I do think, I wish they had limited scrap a bit more, or made it like so you couldn't just keep on reusing the same weapon over and over. I think it would have been better. But I will say if you play on the hardest difficulty, you'll usually need to use it early, so I definitely recommend that. I think it's a better experience overall. Next, my number 2 point is upgrading your car, or putting cards on these little spots to get like new guns and stuff, and this is a mix for me. On the positive side, it can be really cool to kind of kit out your car, and each car has unique upgrade cards that take their starting stuff and make it even better. That's always fun to get into play. But on the negative side, I did find that this all got a bit samey as I played more. I tended to always get like all my spots filled. And the bigger negative is I didn't feel like all the parts were interesting, and certainly ones that deal a ton of damage kind of immediately become the things I go to, so I tended to get similar parts every game. And because your dice are so limited, only 5 for each round in the run, you don't really get to activate all the cool stuff you put on your car. So it feels like you get a lot of cool things, but because of balance and because of limitations of what you can do, you don't really get to see them in action and see them being awesome. But even with that being the case for me, I am going to end on a pro for the core combat puzzle of using your dice. First of all, I think they have pretty cool mitigation. You can use low values, which normally won't activate your car, to perform different effects, and you can use pretty much any die to ram people, which not only does damage to them based on how you've built your car, but also moves them into other spots so that he can then shoot them with different weapons. And, trying to get like a bunch of enemies in one spot and then doing like a area of effect attack against them is great. You can use dice that are above the numbers, so you're not like fully limited in what you roll, although you won't get like the full effect unless you exactly match the number. So I think even though it's a pretty random with the dice, it's a pretty nicely like mitigated and tactically interesting puzzle each round to use these dice. And again, even though scrap can be overpowered, it still like kind of adds to the interestingness of that puzzle. So yeah, I have a lot of fun like still shooting people with my car, even if the balance isn't always exactly where I want it to be. So overall, you might want to check out Wreckland Run if you like quick playing games, if you like dice placement, or if you like sort of the theme and the idea of building up your car. But on the other hand, you might not enjoy this one if you like really tense and consistent difficulty, or if the campaign is the main draw and you're looking for great leveling up or great narrative. I don't really think it offers that. And if you want to see the game in action, I still have my preview playthrough. It's almost identical to the final release, so you can check that out. Good gaming, everyone, and I'll see you at the next stop.